She's not only a clinical psychologist, but she too is an avid eclipse chaser, something that can easily become an addiction. Now I'm going to lay on the couch to welcome Dr. Kate Russo to the show, who can hopefully help me understand why I go to pieces at the moment of totality. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Hi, Paul. How are you? This is not a therapy session.
Darn. Anyway, listen, first of all, you know, I've been reading your website, I've been reading your books. How long, Kate, have you been chasing eclipses personally? When was the first one that you saw?
My first one was in 1999. And, I thought it was something that I would just go and travel to see just once, almost like ticking off a bucket list. And it had such a profound effect on me. I was just so stunned at how unexpected it was. I think we can appreciate when it happens and how amazing it is, but that human response to it, as you were talking about, it threw me, and I didn't understand it at the time. And I just thought, wow, I have to experience this again. And I think that's when eclipse chasers are born, really, because
Yeah.
we experience that, and then we have this overwhelming desire to do it again, just to make sense of it, and then again and again, because it becomes who we are.
So what was your reaction then? Because frankly, it just takes me to tears. Yeah.
Mm. I think for me, I was, that it's like a roller coaster of really intense emotion. And, the first part of it was quite interesting. And you're watching as the moon moves across the sun. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. And I thought that's all it was going to be.
I
I
did,
didn't
yeah.
really expect that. Probably the 5 minutes or so before, when everything goes so dramatically different. I wasn't expecting that. And I wasn't expecting how physically I would respond to it. So that sense of pure excitement, and it was like my heartbeat was in tune with the environment around me, and you couldn't help but just be in awe of the universe at that point. And the light was rapidly diminishing, and I didn't have enough eyes to take it all in. It was just so many rapid changes and moments. And then the overwhelming moment when the moon completely moves in front of the sun. I mean, it's just spellbinding, and it's so out of what you normally experience.
It is.
And
It's so,
emotion.
sorry, it's so otherworldly, isn't it? Because you were talking about the light dimming, and it's not like dusk. It's not like, or the moments before dawn. It's this eerie kind of silver light. It's most peculiar, isn't it?
Yeah, I sort of describe it like the colors are being sucked out of the environment around you,
Yes.
and the light takes on this character that you don't really see. And so just looking around, I think it's important not to just look at the eclipse that's happening, or not just to spend all your time looking through your solar filters. You must look around you and see and feel. And so with those directional changes in light, and the color seem to be removing from the environment, it's like you're in an old-fashioned film or something.
Yeah,
And
it
then the
is.
moments, yep, and the final
It's
moments happen, and it's so quick and dramatic, and it's overwhelming. So the roller coaster of emotion that you have really captures you, and then you have that intensity of that feeling of connection. And in fact, the research that I've done, I've got a really nice acronym to describe what happens to us during those moments of totality. And the acronym is SPACED, which I think is pretty cool. But it's just the few moments beforehand, you have that sense of wrongness. So you know that something's not quite right here, and this is not how the normal day should be. Normally the sun is in the sky, and then you're seeing all these changes, and it feels quite strange. And then you have this primal fear. So it's our primitive aspects of our brain just tapping into this creeping darkness that we see. It's ominous, it's eerie, it's very
it is.
strange. And we're not the only animals that tap into that, of course, because the birds and other mammals respond to that too. And we're just as confused, right?
Yeah,
um,
exactly. And one of the things that I've been thinking about from my own personal experience is the only, three solar eclipses, but two of them actually seeing totality, one in Kenya, one in Indonesia this year. I've been broadcasting a live show, and for for that moment of totality to affect me so much when I am so much in the concentration zone of actually presenting a show. Um, I, I don't know what on earth it would feel like if I can just experience totality just as a normal onlooker. I think from my previous experience, I would actually try and find somewhere really where I was quite alone. But it was when I was thinking about this, Kate, after my experience in Kenya, we'd been driving for 5 days across some of the worst terrain ever. We didn't have any sleep. We were up the night before, setting all the equipment up. Moments before we were meant to be going live with our broadcast, a sandstorm hit, so we had people holding down, canvas tent poles and things like this. Then the show, and then that moment where I just got totally choked up. And I thought to myself afterwards, yeah, that's hardly surprising. I was pretty tired, probably stressed out. But what got me to understand that it wasn't due to that is because even when I thought about that moment after, weeks and months later, and I still do it now, when I think about that moment, when I think about the moment of totality with the Indonesia eclipse, which we both saw, I still get choked up. Is this just because something has affected me so profoundly that even thinking back on that experience is flooding back into my mind? What's your professional psychological research really kind of distilled? Why is it so affecting?
I think because it's such an intense emotion, there's so many emotions, high and low, over a very short period of time. And when we experience emotions, it's like it cuts out our cognitive language side of things. And so our ability to be able to understand and process and talk about what's going on is really quite limited. So, that feeling of being completely choked up and not being able to connect your feelings with what you need to say is really, it's quite a difficult situation when you have to broadcast live, because you just want to be in the moment, as you say. And I had a similar experience after the 2012 eclipse, where I did a live broadcast maybe 5 minutes after, 10 minutes after even. And I was still so caught up in the euphoria of it. And they were asking me professional questions, like, as a psychologist, what do you think? And I was just goo-goo, like, I couldn't connect to that aspect. All I wanted to do was just stay with the moment, stay with the euphoria. And that's all I could do. So I think it's because you're trying to put your poor brain and trying to, put yourself under so much pressure to make sense of it at that time, and you can't. And it's interesting what you say, because a lot of eclipse chasers will describe the feeling that they can tap into that intense emotion just by, watching a video feed, or re-experiencing the sounds, or thinking back to those moments. So all that euphoria comes back, and we can actually get goosebumps and feel the awe and the tingle. So it's like we can tap into those emotional moments, which is something really good, because I think that fires us up for life and gives us passion in other areas of our life too.
It does. It shows, actually, it showed me that I was capable of experiencing, such profound emotion. But, that's one, I've been reading your book, and you've got a lot of quotes in there from, probably hundreds of people that you must have interviewed, other eclipse chasers who you interviewed for your research. There was quite a wide variety of reaction, wasn't there, between the people who you'd spoken to who had witnessed totality?
Yeah, there are commonalities amongst the experience. So we all kind of feel that sense of wrongness, the primal fear, the awe. Awe is central to the totality experience. We feel the euphoria, you feel the connection to something greater, and then you feel that desire to repeat. So those are the common aspects. But really, we all make sense of the totality experience in our own way, because we all have different life experiences, challenges. And so we interpret that and make sense of it in our own unique way. And the first few years I was researching the experiences of eclipse chasers, primarily because they've experienced totality again and again. And it's only
Yeah.
when you have done that, you're able to make sense of it and put some thought and words to it to be able to communicate to me to make sense of it. But in more recent years, I've been interviewing people who've just seen their first total solar eclipse. And I think that's fascinating because they're still at the point where it's still overwhelming. They're trying to make sense of it. And some people are actually quite good at doing that. And some people can't. They just can't because it's just too complex, too overwhelming. So my third book that's coming out is actually about the first time eclipse experience and
Oh,
really
is it?
capturing those raw moments for people, which is really quite exciting.
When's that out, Kate?
As soon as I can finish it, Paul.
Well,
It should
let
be
us
out by
know
the
because
end
I
of
want
the
to
year.
pre-order it on Amazon, please, so that I can
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it a trio on my bookshelf.
Thank you.
Now, listen, you mentioned there about the interviews that you did with eclipse chasers. I'm interested to know if they're making, if they're understanding that experience better and better each time. It doesn't seem to diminish the experience very much because most of the people I know who are avid eclipse chasers and who can afford the resources to actually go on them will never ever miss another one. So
Mm.
did they say that the experience diminishes with the number of eclipses they see?
Well, it's interesting because in psychology, there's something called habituation. And you might know
Yeah.
from your general life that if you do something, you love it, and the more you do it, the novelty wears off. And so it becomes less interesting for you. And so theoretically, you would imagine that when you see an eclipse over and over again, that the novelty will wear off. But this is just not true. It doesn't happen for most people because every eclipse is different.
Yeah.
You go to a different part of the world, you experience different cultures, the logistics of getting there. So, for example, you mentioned your Kenya trip, which took 5 days overland. And, I've had similar epic experiences of, deserts and sea and camels and all sorts of things to get to where you need to get to. So these all add up to our life experiences. And every eclipse is different too. The angle of the sun, the clouds, the crowd, whether you're on your own. So there's so much variability that it's not likely that we're going to get habituated to it. But those who have seen lots and lots of eclipses, you'll find that they're starting to mix their other transferable skills. So, for example, you've got people who start helping others by producing maps or weather statistics, or
Which is
like
what
me,
you're
writing
doing.
books. And yeah, yeah. So it's almost like we want to bring more of ourselves into this, and that then becomes almost like a secondary. I wouldn't call it a healthy addiction, but it's almost like a secondary drive to actually do more. Because I love now planning. I love helping communities prepare for eclipses. And that really happened from 2012 when the total eclipse occurred in my home region in Australia. And being
Right.
on the ground for a couple of months, talking to people before the eclipse and seeing that normal everyday people don't connect to it. They don't really know how big it's going to be. And the media find it really difficult to communicate those aspects. And so I think, it was my community, it was my people who I really wanted to share this with. And so I started at that point then realizing how important it was for people like me who can talk about the eclipse experience to convey that to the general public. And so I do that now. And I helped out in 2015 in the Faroe Islands, and I'm
Yeah.
helping out across the US by a lot of communities along the path of totality. I'm helping just with their planning, their thinking about it. And it's just, I get a lot of excitement from that aspect too.
You've got actually. I mean, I know you're working with a lot of organisations to help them, set up and plan for their eclipse experiences. But the general public, I think I saw on your website, beingintheshadow.com, there's a download that
Mhm.
anyone can download, which helps people go about planning their eclipse. Is that right?
Yeah, so I wrote last year, I published a white paper on community eclipse planning. And I did this because, what I learned in 2012 in my own community was quite unique. You learn things that then, because uh, whenever a path of totality happens in a country or a community, they've never had one of those. Once in
Yeah.
every 375 years this happens. So it's very rare that someone has actually seen one in these communities, nor have they planned for one before. But it will be the biggest event of the year for that community, no doubt about it. It's just that they don't know it. And so it's really hard, even as outsiders, to come into communities to let them know this is going to be big. And it's a leap of faith for them to actually trust you and to acknowledge that this will be a big thing. And they do realize that as time goes on. So I guess I wrote the white paper to actually highlight some of the things beforehand, so communities can actually have a structure or a guidance for this. And I pretty much applied what I'd learned in 2012 to my experience as the eclipse consultant for the Faroe Islands in 2015. So I kind of used that framework for what I did and my involvement with that community. And after that, again, I interviewed the key organizers and coordinators just so we could get a really robust, solid way of, here's how a community plans. So I've pretty much wanted to make sure that that's available to all communities along the path of totalities for future eclipses. And it's available for free online on my website. Yep.
That's great. I mean, certainly we were in the Faroe Islands for that eclipse, and we were just very conscious of being in this tiny, tiny community. And it has, even though the Faroe is quite large, it still has that feeling of such a tiny community, close-knit community, which hasn't really been affected that much by the outside world. And then suddenly there's this deluge of tens of thousands of tourists suddenly descending on them to experience this wonderful moment. So I'm sure they appreciated the help. I just want to ask you actually two things very quickly. Are there any other astronomical or natural events or phenomena that you've seen cause similar kind of responses in humans? I'm thinking
Well, I
maybe
think it taps
the
into
aurora,
that.
the northern lights.
Yeah. I mean, primarily, I think a lot of people who are watching this might be aware of the overview effect that, when astronauts go to outer space and then they come back and they seem to have a very different perspective of how fragile our world is, how fragile life is. So we call that the overview effect. And I think, as close as possible to being on the ground, the total solar eclipse is the most unique experience that we can actually tap into that, because it allows us to experience the universe in just a very small moment of time, and we feel connected to something greater, and it's just really powerful. I think the aurora also has very similar feelings as well. And what they have in common is that you've got it's interesting what happens. So the intellectual alignments, or the circumstances that cause the aurora, but you also have the in the moment response. Those
Yeah.
overwhelming feelings of wow, and it's just the
Wow.
beauty and standing there and seeing these things. But the third factor, which is really hard to communicate, is the transformational factor that these things can have on our lives. So they make us think about our position in the world, that they make us understand that this concept of time. Time is really precious, but we're only on this world for a very short period of time, and it's these celestial events that happen that allow us to get a window into that understanding. And it doesn't so much happen with other events, such as the transit of Mercury, for example, that we had. That's very interesting. There's the alignment, but it doesn't have that emotional aspect
Yeah.
of it or the transformational aspect of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I have to say from personal experience, in fact, it was on that same Faroe Islands eclipse. It was one of the largest solar storms during the previous week. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that. And during that huge auroral northern light storm, my overwhelming feeling was just of excitement. It was just, it changing all the time. And then, as you say, the transit of Mercury was, yeah, it was more, there go the mechanics of the solar
Yeah.
system, but not necessarily that awe-inspiring. Kate, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to certainly see you next year. Where are you going to be for the USA 2017 eclipse?
I'll be viewing from Wyoming. I'm leading my eclipse tour group with the Independent Traveller, who are actually at the moment in Tanzania.
Oh,
So hopefully getting clear skies there. But I'll be in Wyoming, and I just really can't wait. I'm on the daily countdown. I've been on the countdown for like over 2 or 3 years for this eclipse. So it's really good. Yeah.
Well, I wish you well and your expedition well for that one. And more than anything else, I'd just like to kind of congratulate you on the number of people that I know you're going to be helping next year to make the most of what is, certainly going to be a truly memorable event and probably the most widely viewed totality ever. So I hope you have a fabulous trip.
That's great. Thank you so much, and all the best, and good luck with the rest of the broadcast here.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay.
That was Dr. Kate Russo, eclipse chaser extraordinaire, clinical psychologist and author of 2 fascinating eclipse books. And if you are preparing for next year's eclipse, I highly recommend you get them. And it will just maybe help contextualize your experience when you get to it. One of them is called Total Addiction, the life of an eclipse chaser, and the second one is Totality, the total solar eclipse of 2012, which is what sparked Kate's eclipse chasing escapades